All right, Vikings fans, this one could get pretty interesting. There's some serious talk coming out about what may have been happening behind the scenes, and honestly, it raises a lot of questions about where this team is heading. We're talking about locker room dynamics, coaching, accountability, and a situation that could have a much bigger impact on the future than anyone expected. So stick with me, because there's a lot to unpack here. And before we get into it, hit that like button if you're riding with the purple and drop SKOL in the comments if you're ready for this season. Let's see how strong Vikings Nation is in here. Something may be happening behind the scenes in Minnesota that could completely change the way Vikings fans look at J.J. McCarthy's future with this franchise. And the most concerning part is not simply what happened on the field. According to claims highlighted in a recent article by NFL writer Tyler Dunne, questions were raised about McCarthy's interactions with Kevin O'Connell, his approach inside the film room, and even his preparation and professionalism. Those are serious allegations, and they need to be handled carefully because none of this should automatically be treated as established fact. But if the accounts cited by Dunn accurately describe what happened inside the Vikings organization, Minnesota could be dealing with a much deeper quarterback problem than poor throws, injuries, or an offense that never fully clicked. One of the central claims is that McCarthy sometimes pushed back when O'Connell made coaching points. Dunn described situations in which the young quarterback would reportedly respond by questioning why the Vikings could not do something a different way. In isolation, a quarterback asking questions is not necessarily alarming. NFL quarterbacks need to understand concepts, challenge ideas at times, and communicate what they are seeing. The issue presented in the article is apparently how those exchanges were perceived given McCarthy's experience level. That distinction matters. The comparison made in the discussion was Sam Darnold. According to the account, Darnold could occasionally ask for a different route on the backside of a play, but the suggestion was that he approached those conversations more diplomatically. McCarthy, meanwhile, was a young quarterback still trying to establish himself in the NFL, and that creates the question Vikings fans now have to wrestle with. Was McCarthy simply trying to participate in the construction of the offense, or had his willingness to challenge coaching crossed a line with O'Connell and people inside the building? Because if it was the latter, this story becomes significantly more important. O'Connell is not being presented as a coach without quarterback experience on his resume. The discussion specifically points toward his work with Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins, and Darnold. Cousins has spoken highly of O'Connell, and Darnold was also cited as someone who continued to praise him. So, when a young quarterback reportedly pushes back against that coach, while simultaneously struggling to establish himself, you can understand why people around the situation might notice. But Vikings fans also need to separate the reporting from the interpretation surrounding it. The original discussion itself repeatedly stopped short of declaring every allegation unquestionably true. That is important. Dunn's article is being used to raise serious questions about McCarthy, but accusations involving what happened in meetings or private coaching conversations deserve context before anybody turns them into a final verdict on a player's character. And there is another part of this story that might be even more surprising. Matt Hasselbeck was cited in the discussion as having heard whispers involving concerns about McCarthy's preparation and professionalism. If accurate, that would attack what many expected to be one of McCarthy's strengths. The conversation surrounding him had been built around energy, work, and being a strong teammate. Even while discussing these concerns, it was acknowledged that teammates have described McCarthy positively, and that he possesses an infectious energy. That creates a strange contradiction. How can a quarterback generate that kind of support from teammates while concerns about preparation and professionalism are simultaneously circulating? That is exactly why this situation cannot be reduced to calling McCarthy a problem and moving on. There appear to be competing pieces of information, and the Vikings have to determine which ones actually matter to his future. There were football problems too, and those are much easier to identify. Alec Lewis was cited describing extra hitches that disrupted the timing of passing concepts, difficulty applying touch to certain areas of the field, and limitations that affected what Minnesota could comfortably run offensively. McCarthy's high ankle sprain and hand injuries were also mentioned as factors that destroyed positive momentum. According to that account, those struggles eventually forced O'Connell to simplify the offense and become more conservative as a play caller. That detail could be critical. If your head coach is reducing his offensive menu because of what his quarterback can execute, then the problem is no longer about one bad game or one ugly interception. It affects the identity of the entire offense. The description was essentially of Minnesota moving toward a simpler formula. Run the football, shorten games, lean on the defense, and reduce what was being demanded from McCarthy. Yet this is where O'Connell's role deserves scrutiny as well. The argument made in the discussion was that O'Connell watched McCarthy throughout training camp and saw him every day in practice. If the quarterback was not ready to execute the full offense, why did Minnesota apparently need regular season evidence before making major adjustments? Why wasn't the offense tailored to McCarthy's developmental level from the beginning? That does not remove responsibility from the quarterback. It does, however, make this more complicated than saying one player destroyed everything. McCarthy entered the NFL after a college career at Michigan in which winning became normal. His earlier football path at Nazareth Academy and IMG Academy was also referenced as part of a broader point. He had experienced enormous team success and relatively little losing. Then adversity arrived quickly. The discussion points to the meniscus injury, followed by the enormous expectations that came with taking control of a team coming off a 14-win season. When things subsequently deteriorated, the question became whether McCarthy knew how to respond to sustained professional adversity. And that question becomes much more serious when connected to the reported exchanges with O'Connell. Maybe what was interpreted as pushback was a young quarterback desperately searching for answers. Maybe McCarthy believed he was helping. Maybe there is context missing from private conversations that none of us can see. But if the frustration was real, and if O'Connell genuinely believed his young quarterback was resisting coaching while struggling to execute the offense, Vikings fans have every reason to wonder whether the relationship suffered damage that goes beyond football mechanics. And there is one more development from the same discussion that makes the entire situation even more fascinating, because the contrast drawn between McCarthy and Kyler Murray could tell us a lot about what O'Connell may want from his quarterback going forward. Before we get into that next part, I want to know exactly where Vikings fans stand after hearing these claims. Do you see the reported pushback and preparation concerns as legitimate reasons to question J.J. TV, McCarthy's future in Minnesota, or do you think people are reaching conclusions without enough context? Put your opinion in the comments, because the answer to that question becomes even more important when we examine what was said about O'Connell, McCarthy, and Kyler Murray next. Now, I want to hear directly from Vikings fans. After everything we've discussed, where do you stand on J.J. McCarthy and the direction Minnesota is taking at quarterback? Do you believe the Vikings should remain patient with McCarthy, or have we reached the point where Kevin O'Connell needs to move in a different direction? Drop your take in the comments, because I want to see where Vikings Nation stands on this one. And if you want to stay on top of everything happening around the Minnesota Vikings, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. There is a lot to follow with this team, and we'll be right here breaking it all down. SKOL Vikings.